It's been a torrid couple of weeks for Labour and, in particular, for its leader, Sir Keir Starmer. He has, of course, suspended two by-election candidates who'd made derogatory comments about Israel, but only after the story had run away with itself for a day or two. Then, of course, there's been the canning of a pledge to spend £28 billion a year on the green economy. Thank goodness, then, he might have thought, for the two by-election victories over the Tories on Thursday night, delivering a much-needed morale boost ahead of this weekend's Scottish Labour Party conference. But hang on a minute, what's this? A letter from Grampian Chamber of Commerce with 800 members' signatures from right across the business community saying Labour could wreak the kind of damage in the North East that Margaret Thatcher wreaked in the coalfields if they go ahead with plans to raise the windfall tax on energy companies working in the North Sea. Oh, and then there's the bind the party finds itself in over its position on a ceasefire in Gaza, which is going to be the subject of a Commons vote next week. Cue more anger and angst in Labour ranks. Well, shortly before we came on air, Labour's Scottish leader ANAS Sarwar joined me from his party's conference in Glasgow. ANAS Sarwar, your conference yesterday unanimously passed a motion calling for an immediate ceasefire in Israel and Gaza. The SNP are going to put a similar motion before the Commons next week. How are your two Scottish Labour MPs going to vote? For a ceasefire or against it?
Well, look, I think it goes beyond just our two Scottish Labour MPs. I want MPs from across the Parliament to send a unified message around demanding a ceasefire and an end to the violence, the immediate release of hostages, immediate access to humanitarian aid, and that pathway to a two-state solution. So I know our whips have already made contact with the SNP whips to say, look, we ultimately both want the same thing. We both want the violence to stop right now. We both want the release of hostages. We both want immediate access to humanitarian aid. We both want that two-state solution. So let's come together to try and persuade the Parliament. Remember, the Conservatives have a majority in that Parliament. Let's persuade the Parliament to back that position so we can send a strong voice to those on the ground in Israel and in Gaza so we can get that peace and that ceasefire that I think people so desperately want. Let's not just make this about two opposition parties in the Parliament.
Is not with the SNP. I understand you've referred to this motion as a good motion. Your difference here actually is with Sir Keir Starmer. Why are you talking to the SNP whips? Why aren't you talking to your party leader and bringing him on board?
Look, I'm absolutely having conversations with Keir. I'm having conversations with the wider UK Labour Party. And I actually don't think there's the distance that people are projecting here. Keir was at the Munich Security Conference yesterday. He said that he supported a ceasefire at the Munich Security Conference. He has said he wants the violence to stop right now. He's also repeated the other three parts of what we passed as a motion here at conference. So I don't think we should hunt for difference. I think we should be hunting for that support right across, I hope, the wider Parliament, not just, as I say, two opposition parties, so we can get the violence to stop right now.
But the problem with this, sorry, Mr. Sarwar, in a moment like this,
children and women in Palestine right now.
You can talk about this being semantic, small differences. The problem with that argument is that in a moment like this, it is completely binary. Your two Scottish Labour MPs have to walk through one of two lobbies, don't they, or abstain. And if they walk through a lobby in support of the SNP motion, which Scottish Labour, their party, supports, they'll lose their jobs as frontbenchers.
No, because the entire UK Labour Party wants to see the violence stop right now. We want to see a ceasefire.
So they can vote in support of an immediate ceasefire? Is that what you're saying?
So the point I'm making is I want the Parliament to vote for a ceasefire right now.
An immediate ceasefire?
I want to see that happen. And well, right now means immediate. I mean, we're having this bizarre conversation where we're asking whether ceasefire means the same as a truce, whether immediate means the same as right now.
That's
all
fine.
of these things.
Sorry, Mr. Sarwar, let me really simplify this.
Actually, on the ground, people are dying, and that should be our focus, rather than two opposition political parties arguing about individual words that I hope actually means the same thing.
Exactly.
I know the SNP
well, let me
want
just
the
take you
violence
back
to stop right now.
to my
We
original
want the
question.
violence to stop right now.
Let me take you back then to my original question. Does that mean that your two Scottish Labour MPs can vote in favour of the SNP motion for an immediate ceasefire?
So we are openly saying that we are happy to work with the SNP about the motion that's tabled. I've seen the motion that they
you want them to
published in
change
terms of the draft words. Look, what I'm saying is, can we find, if there are areas of disagreement around individual words that ultimately mean the same thing, then is there scope for that discussion to try and send a unified message from the Parliament?
I'm sure viewers and listeners this morning who are with us will be mystified as to why there is still this difference and why your two MPs can't vote in support of this SNP motion as it stands, because there's one word of difference.
Martin, let me be really clear. That is not what I'm suggesting. What I'm saying is there is no motion actually tabled yet. We don't yet know what any amendments might be tabled to that motion on Wednesday. But what I'm saying is, if we both agree that we want the same thing, I believe the SNP, and I hope they believe us when we say we want the violence to stop right now.
Okay, listen, let me move this on.
A ceasefire right now.
Sure.
A ceasefire
I know,
right
but
now.
immediate, there's the point of distinction. We've discussed why that's really significant when it comes to the vote.
Whatever you want to call it, Martin, I want it to stop right now.
I know, but so why are you asking the SNP to move their position and not Sir Keir Starmer? Anyway, look, we've been over that territory.
I'm not asking the SNP to move their position. I'm asking for us to work together to get the right thing delivered.
Fine. Let me ask you, still related to Israel-Gaza, let me ask you about your two candidates who were suspended in Rochdale last week for supposed anti-Semitic, anti-Israeli comments. Can you guarantee a similar thing won't happen here in Scotland? How thoroughly have your candidates been vetted here, and by whom?
Well, look, I'm really proud of the candidates that we have selected. I think they'll be fantastic candidates. I hope they'll be fantastic Labour MPs, and I hope many of them will serve in a Labour government in the future beyond this general election. And we have had really stringent due diligence processes. We often get criticised when candidates don't make it through a due diligence process, but I think what's happened in Rochdale emphasised the need for that strong due diligence process. Selecting of Scottish Labour candidates is, of course, a responsibility for the Scottish Party and for the Scottish Executive Committee. We have put all our candidates through that stringent due diligence process. I'm confident that we have a strong, good group of candidates. But let me be really clear, if information comes to light that has not been in the public domain or available to us in the process of selecting those candidates, and anything is seen come to light that demonstrates any kind of form of prejudice like anti-Semitism, then that would not be tolerable, and those people would not be Scottish Labour candidates. We have to have a zero tolerance approach to anti-Semitism or indeed any other form of prejudice or hate.
Where's the bar on that, Mr Sarwar? What are you allowed to think and what are you not allowed to think? Because Graham Jones's comments, although some people would have found them slightly unsavoury when he was talking about people who went to fight for the IDF, the Israeli army, getting locked up, they weren't necessarily anti-Semitic. They were kind of anti-Israeli government and anti-Israeli authorities. So where is the bar?
So look, it's perfectly reasonable to criticise and indeed sometimes to condemn individual organisations and individual governments across the world. That is perfectly reasonable. What can never be allowed is to project the decisions of any individual organisation or any individual government onto a collective group of people. So I'll give you one practical example of that. Anybody that seeks to use the actions of any Islamic regime or any Islamic organisation to then preach Islamophobia against every Muslim across the world would be completely and utterly reprehensible and wrong. The exact same applies. Anyone that tries to project the actions of an Israeli government or indeed any Israeli organisation or Jewish organisation across the world to then try and legitimise hatred of the Jewish people across the world would be completely and utterly wrong. We have to separate Hamas from the Palestinian people. They have no interest in peace. They're a terrorist organisation. And I would also say we have to separate Benjamin Netanyahu from the Israeli people, because Benjamin Netanyahu leads a far-right government. He has no interest in peace. And actually, he, in my view, is letting his own people down. The people of Palestine and Israel are desperate for peace. Sadly, their political leadership, either in Gaza or the Israeli people, in terms of Benjamin Netanyahu and his government, sadly aren't currently led by good faith actors who want peace. They're led by bad faith actors who want the destruction to continue, and that's not acceptable. Let
me move this on then to domestic matters. You this week are having what you are proclaiming as a very, very successful, certainly a very busy, very corporate Scottish Labour Party conference. Very suited and booted, lots of talk of cutting tax here, courting business there. You're pitching yourselves as the party of business. Is this the return of Labour being comfortable with people being filthy rich?
Look, working people can wear suits too. I've seen lots of trade unionists at this conference wearing a shirt, yes, some of them wearing a tie, yes, wearing a suit. So I think the idea that only the corporate types wear suits, Martin, I think is probably from a different era. I know you and I are more modern day kind of people. We don't like wearing a tie. We like to wear slightly dressed down a little bit, maybe even wear jeans on occasion when you're in a television studio. You and I both do that on occasion, but actually the important point here is there's a great collection at this conference of, yes, people that have come from business organisations, yes, people that have or currently do lead businesses, as well as trade unionists, because the Labour Party I lead is unashamedly pro-worker, pro-business and pro-growth.
Right, because you know where I'm going to on this.
In order to deliver the social change.
Under a Labour government...
On you go. I don't know where you're going on this, Martin.
Yeah, no, you do. So let me just ask you the question. Under a Labour government, you won't be able to get benefits for a third child, but you will be able to get unlimited bonuses if you're a millionaire banker. How egalitarian's that?
Well, well, look, I would put it a different way. We currently have an SNP government that believes that if you earn £28,500 in this country...
I'm asking about your policy.
You somehow have the broadest shoulders. If you let me finish, you have the broadest shoulders and therefore should pay more tax. But somehow, if you're an oil and gas company that is raking in billions of pounds in profit, that you should somehow pay less tax. I think that's an anti-worker, anti-working people policy, rather than the position that we are laying out, which is a new deal for working people, the most transformative change in workers' rights for a generation, delivering a real living wage so we can lift people out of poverty, give them opportunity, and demonstrate what the Labour Party fundamentally believes, that the best route out of poverty is good work and positive opportunities for our young people.
So what do you say to
the need to partnership with businesses in order to grow our economy, because it's the fruits of that growth that allows us to, yes, reform our public services, including the health and social care system, but I hope also it allows us to use the fruits of that growth to reduce the tax burden on working people who are currently being asked to pay more and get less from this SNP government.
Fine. So what do you say to the anything between 20, 42, 100,000 people who have been told their jobs are under threat because of your plans to increase a windfall tax in the North Sea? The plans you're just hailing there as being pro-worker and pro-egalitarian, could the business communities in the North East are warning, be right up there with what Thatcher did in the coalfields in terms of economic wipeout?
Well, I don't accept the characterisation.
They're all wrong. 800 businesses who wrote to you are wrong.
No. What I'm saying is, and I've said this over the course of this conference, I can understand people's concerns because they have seen what happens when you don't manage a transition. Your reference to Thatcher and the coal and mining industry is the perfect example of that. When you get a transition wrong, you can devastate communities. Many people lose their jobs, and many of those communities fall into a spiral of poverty that lasts and often generations. We cannot afford to make that mistake when it comes to our oil and gas industry. So, of course, we have to have dialogue, but more than that, we have to have partnership, because the transition we're talking about is only going to be possible if you actually leverage in the support and the investment from the oil and gas industry, who have that scale in order to make that transition
and
a
who
reality.
are saying this morning they want crisis talks next week. So
them.
Extreme is the danger here if you don't change your minds. They're really serious about this, Mr. Sarwar. They're looking for emergency talks next week. They're talking within themselves, and it's not just energy companies, it's kitchen designers, it's PR firms, it's educators. It's right across the board up there. In the North East, they're really, really worried that you're about to wipe the place out.
So let me be clear, we're not waiting for conversations next week. I've been meeting many of these companies this week to have conversations with them. It's why we're really clear, alongside a windfall tax, we will have GB Energy, a publicly owned energy generation company headquartered here in Scotland, that will use the power of a UK Treasury to leverage in, yes, UK money, but also leverage in private sector money to manage that transition. We've got the National Wealth Fund that's around investing billions of pounds into the supply chain jobs, where the scale of the jobs can come in this country. And we have the British Jobs Bonus that's about supporting those communities that need to see that transition in order to protect jobs. And all of our energy policies will be driven by 4 principles. One is more jobs, not fewer jobs. Second, lower bills, not higher bills. Third, greater energy security, not more reliance on despotic regimes like Russia. And fourth, crucially for Scotland, making sure we demonstrate climate leadership. Because I honestly believe there is going to be a global leader in this transition. I want that global leader to be Scotland. I want that to be backed up with a strong UK Treasury. And that's what you get if you elect a UK Labour government.
OK, let me ask you one more thing. I was going to ask you a question about what you're going to offer those soft nationalist voters who are apparently heading over to Labour in advance of this election. But I listened to you on a podcast this morning. I was driving in, and you were asked the question, what one power would you give the Scottish Parliament? You said, I'll give you two. I would give enhanced borrowing powers and I would give immigration reform. And you said, we can maintain a single UK Home Office and border agency, but if you have two governments working together, you can find a Scottish solution to Scottish problems. What are you saying there? We could have a separate immigration policy under a Labour government in Scotland. We could get people back in who were doing the jobs in our restaurant, hospitality sector, for example. They could come back from Europe, say.
So what I was saying was, you may recall, Martin, when Jack McConnell was First Minister, he negotiated a deal with a UK Labour government for a scheme known as the Fresh Talent Scheme that identified a skills issue here in Scotland, and he found a Scottish solution to a Scottish problem that was unique to Scotland in order to get more people those support they needed. And what I want to do is, yes, we're going to see us reform the Migration Advisory Committee where Scotland will have more direct representation. Of course, we need to reform our UK immigration system, which is currently so broken. But what I want to see us develop between 2024 and 2026 is Fresh Talent 2.
Okay.
How do we identify the areas where we can maintain that single border agency, that single UK Home Office, but find a Scottish solution to a Scottish problem, demonstrating the best of cooperation between two governments that delivers for Scottish people, rather than the conflict between two governments that ultimately fails the Scottish people, which we currently have under the SNP and the Tories.
We are out of time, Mr Sarwar. Let me just ask you this one very straight question. Are you in discussion with UK Labour about organising, and will there be a separate Scottish immigration policy if Keir Starmer's in Downing Street?
Well, as I say, I've just laid out to you, we will go into the election in 2024.
That's going to happen, is it?
Setting out how we will. No, one second, we will set out in 2024 how we reform the UK immigration system, how we get fairness back into that UK immigration system. And then beyond 2024, I want to work in cooperation with them to develop what a Fresh Talent 2 scheme could look like. And that's something we will be sharing more details on as we work through that progress. But first, we've got to elect that UK Labour government this year.
All right. Well, plenty more for you to discuss across the river from here on that over the rest of the day, the rest of your conference. ANAS Sarwar, I'm sure we'll see you soon. Thank you very much indeed for being with us this morning.
My pleasure, Martin. Thank you.
ANAS Sarwar speaking to me just a little while ago. Sir Keir Starmer addressing conference, of course, later on today. Interestingly, while you were listening to that, I got a message from Owen Thompson, the SNP MP from Midlothian. He said, Martin, just listening to your interview with ANAS Sarwar on the Sunday show, he claims Labour whips are discussing a ceasefire vote with SNP whips. As the SNP chief whip at Westminster, I can say this is entirely untrue, as there has been no contact with me. That, Owen Thompson, the chief whip in Westminster. We will pursue that, I'm sure, and take it up. It's a story that's not going to go away, isn't it?